The gold rush of the mid-1800s was a period of feverish excitement and immense chaos. As waves of fortune seekers surged into the American West, they unknowingly set off a chain reaction that would forever alter the lives of Native American tribes. The lure of gold brought conflict, displacement, and profound changes to the indigenous peoples who had thrived in these regions for centuries. But what was the true cost of this glittering promise? And how did the tribes, whose land was trampled in the rush for riches, survive and adapt amidst such overwhelming adversity? Stick around as we delve into the stories of the indigenous peoples whose lives were irrevocably changed, and how they endured the impact of this quest for gold on their land. In 1848, James W. Marshall found glittering flakes of gold in the American River at Sutter's Mill, California. His discovery led to the popular gold rush. The increased influx of this gold into the U.S. money supply boosted the American economy. This gold rush attracted people from far and near in their numbers to settle in Sutter's Mill. Even families abandoned their homes and migrated to the land of gold. Half of these settlers came through the sea, while others took trail. Even though their journey was perilous, they undoubtedly believed that the journey was worth it, since their dreams were fueled by the tales of the easy fortune that awaited them in the West. According to the U.S. Census Bureau, 750,000 pounds of gold were found in California between 1848 to 1855. The settlers who came as a result of the gold rush were known as the 49ers. These 49ers, in their quest for more gold, attacked and chased some Native American tribes off their land, while California was the epicenter of the gold rush. The fever for gold soon spread beyond its borders, and then subsequently, gold rushes started happening in places like the Klondike region of the Yukon Territory, and even in faraway Australia. Every discovery triggered another wave of migration that suddenly transformed remote landscapes into bustling towns. However, the Native American tribes who had lived on these lands for generations suffered from the influx of settlers. The arrival of these settlers heralded the beginning of a devastating disruption for them. Before the discovery of gold in the early 80s, the Native American tribes were living in the region we now know today as Canada and its surrounding regions. The tribes that thrived there were the Miwok, Maidu, and Yurok. They lived in oneness with the land, revering every creature as well as inanimate objects based on their beliefs that everything possessed a spirit. Over 150,000 Native Americans lived in California before the gold rush and had rich cultures and traditions. Their main occupation was fishing, hunting, and gathering berries and wild fruits for sustenance. They also practiced limited agriculture. Initially, the Native Americans and the first wave of settlers interacted with each other peacefully. The Native American tribes traded their goods and knowledge with the new settlers to assist them with the essential survival skills needed to thrive. However, the story began to change as news of the gold discovery spread, and more 49ers arrived in California. The number of new arrivals overwhelmed the existing communities. Their influx came alongside diseases such as smallpox and measles, which decimated the tribe's population as they had no immunity against these diseases. As the epidemic increased, it weakened their ability to resist the encroachment on their land. During the era of the gold rush, miners dug billions of tons of the earth, excavated riverbeds, and more. With the use of mercury, they could easily separate the gold from its ore. By doing so, these miners were releasing toxic chemicals into the rivers and lakes. Naturally, mercury is highly detrimental to human health and causes a series of diseases that can eventually lead to death. As the new settlers pushed further into Native American territories, there was a huge competition for the available land and resources. So, it was either the tribe's lands that were taken by force or systematically through dubious treaties to missions and reservations. Some natives were enslaved while some were brutally murdered. Their children were not left out, as boys were sold for $60 and girls for $200. However, in the 19th and 20th centuries, the tribe's children were forced to go to boarding schools owned by the government and schools owned by the church. They were also forbidden to speak their languages. Numerous indigenous children were still forcibly placed in work training programs where they were used as slave labor in homes, farms, timber operations, and other enterprises. As a result, conflicts began to arise as the Native American tribes resisted the invasion of their ancestral lands. However, as we all know, their victories were short-lived, as they were still chased from their lands. The displacement of the Native American tribes from their lands showed the beginning of a tragic era, as their entire communities were uprooted and forced to leave their homes, hunting grounds, and especially their sacred sites. This loss of land altered their way of life and severed their spiritual connection to their ancestral territories. As the gold rush gained popularity, the increased demand for land and resources resulted in violence and conflicts between the Native American tribes and the increasing number of miners and settlers. Eventually, it turned into full-blown wars. One of such significant wars during this intense strife was the Mariposa War of 1850. This war started as a result of the discovery of gold by miners at the Sierra Nevada foothills, which the Ahwahneechee, a band of the southern Sierra Miwok people, originally occupied. The miners then began to take over their land and resources. This resulted in clashes between the miners and the indigenous people in Yosemite Valley, and then proceeded to a brutal war. The U.S. government finally had to intervene, which led to the forceful displacement of the indigenous people of the Ahwahneechee Valley. Another notable war related to the gold rush's aftermath was the Muddock War of 1872, also known as the Lava Beds War, between the indigenous Muddock people and the United States Army in northeastern California and southeastern Oregon from 1872 to 1873. They, too, were eventually displaced from their ancestral land. The U.S. government and military played a crucial role in the displacements of the Native American tribe. They created forts and deployed soldiers to protect the interests of settlers and miners. They endured that treaties were often signed under duress or by deceit, promised protection and resources that were hardly delivered. These treaties frequently led to the confinement of tribes on reservations. This further limited their freedom and restricted access to their traditional lands. The impact of these conflicts emanating from the gold rush factor was severe. These thriving indigenous communities were reduced to struggling groups confined to reservations with little or no resources. The loss of their land meant a loss of their livelihoods, their rich culture, and identity. The effects of this era of conflict are still felt to date. This is why numerous Native American communities are still fighting for their rights and recognition today. The human cost of the gold rush was immensely disastrous. Families were torn apart, lives were lost, and entire cultures were threatened with extinction. The increased drive for gold and land left deep scars on the Native American community. These scars serve as a somber reminder of this turbulent period in American history today. The whole gold rush saga brought with it widespread environmental destruction. The methods used by miners included hydraulic mining and dredging. These methods wreaked havoc on the natural landscape. The entire forests were felled for timber due to the surge of miners and settlers, and as such the soil was exposed to erosion. The rivers, once abundant with fish, a crucial food source for many tribes, became choked with sediment and mercury. The once clear waters turned muddy and lifeless, making the fishing occupation impossible and depriving Native American communities of a vital food source. The disruption of these waterways also meant the total loss of their traditional practices and ceremonies linked to the river's natural cycles. Wildlife habitats were also destroyed as mining processes had already contaminated the biodiversity. This environmental havoc had severe consequences for the Native American tribes who relied on these ecosystems for their survival. The gold rush's environmental impact went beyond the land's physical damage. Numerous sacred sites and cultural landmarks of these tribes were destroyed. This was because the mining operations and settlements encroached upon areas that held deep spiritual significance for Native American tribes. This not only halted their cultural practices, but also inflicted a deep spiritual loss that worsened their physical displacement from their ancestral land. The aftermath of the gold rush on the Native American tribes' culture was immensely disastrous. Their artifacts, traditions, and entire ways of life were almost extinct. The influx of settlers brought new cultural norms and values that dismissed or outrightly suppressed the various tribes' traditions. This cultural erasure could also be identified as a form of violence that extended well beyond the physical and seeped into the very identity of these communities. For the tribes forced onto reservations, their lives became a daily struggle for survival. They were confined to small and inhospitable regions. They faced poverty, diseases, and a constant battle to preserve their cultural heritage and identities. The loss of their traditional lands meant the loss of their known traditional ways of life. This made several of them struggle to adapt to their new and harsh reality. The long-term impact of the gold rush has left a deep hole in the hearts of the Native American communities. The displacement, environmental destruction, and cultural loss endured during this period continued to affect these communities to this day. Despite the passage of time, the legacy of the gold rush remains an important part of their history. The demographic shifts and economic challenges that the gold rush brought about are still evident today. Numerous Native American tribes still face high poverty rates, limited or no access to resources, and multiple ongoing legal battles over land rights. The loss of their ancestral lands has had lasting effects on their ability to maintain their traditional livelihoods and economic independence. Over the years, Native American leaders and activists have fought and still fight tirelessly for their tribe's rights and recognition. Legal battles to reclaim land and secure compensation for past injustices have been central to this struggle. These efforts are about the restitution of their past, preserving their heritage, and ensuring a better future for their communities. Many of these prominent leaders have gone way over the roof for their people. Some of these inspiring Native American leaders are Chief White Eyes, Standing Bear, and Billy Frank Jr. Chief White Eyes was a Delaware visionary from the Ohio country during the era of the American Revolution. He served as an emissary between the white and the American Indians and helped negotiate a treaty to end the war. Before his death, he wanted to form an alliance with the U.S. government in order to make Delaware a people-led state. Unfortunately, as soon as he died, his plans also collapsed. Standing Bear was a Ponca chief who wanted to fight for his people's rights through the U.S. judiciary. Their lands in Nebraska were illegally given to the Santee Dakota tribe as part of the U.S. government's negotiation to end the Red Cloud's War, while the Poncas were displaced to the region known as Oklahoma today. Many Poncas died as a result of starvation and malaria. Standing Bear's first son also died, so he made up his mind to bury his son in their ancestral land. In January 1879, Standing Bear left Poncas Reservation for Nebraska with his son's remains. The U.S. Secretary of the Interior, Brigadier General George Crook, ordered the chief to be arrested for leaving the reservation without permission. On May 12th, federal Judge Elmer Dundee ruled that an Indian is a person within the meaning of habeas corpus, a writing that brings a person before a court. The decision was a landmark, recognizing that an American Indian is a person under the law and entitled to its rights and protection. Standing Bear was released, and returned to the land by the Niobrara River in Nebraska to bury his son alongside his ancestors. Chief Standing Bear died in Nebraska in 1908. He was buried alongside him. During a formal ceremony in 2019 in the U.S. Congress, a statue of this remarkable Ponca replaced one of William Jennings Bryan in the Statuary Hall of the U.S. Capitol. It was in accordance with a resolution passed by the Nebraska State Legislature. In the 1960s, Billy Frank Jr., who was a prominent Nisqually, led Northwest Indians in the fight for the recognition of their fishing rights. The hydroelectric power development and increased commercial fishing had taken its toll on Northwest salmon population. In 1965, as the salmon in that region were on a downward spiral and almost extinct, there was tension between native and non-native sportsmen. This made the commercial fishermen become violent. Frank, who had been arrested in protests over 50 times since 1945, maintained that the Nisqually and other native nations in the state of Washington had been guaranteed their rights to fish by treaty. His actions attracted national attention and support from noted Hollywood actors. Over the years, several Native Americans have come together to create a kind of legacy for their children and children's children. This legacy will give them room to be able to bond with their ancestral roots and have an identity. It includes cultural revival, environmental restoration, and more. Cultural revival has been another important aspect of the long-term response to the gold rush's impact. Today, several tribes are actively working to revive their languages, customs, and tradition. These efforts will help to restore a sense of identity and continuity to these tribes, allowing their new generations to connect with their ancestral heritage. Environmental restoration projects have also become a crucial part of this legacy. Native American communities are creating efforts to rehabilitate damaged ecosystems, reintroduce native species, and implement sustainable practices. These initiatives will heal the land and build a deep connection between Native Americans and their environment. The gold rush left a complicated history of hardship, strength, and recovery. While the past can't be changed, tribes continue to reclaim their lands, preserve their culture, and restore their environment, demonstrating their enduring strength. This resilience inspires younger generations to strive for even more. As we look back on this turbulent period, it is essential to recognize and honor the resilience of Native American tribes. Despite the immense hardships, these Native American tribes have demonstrated remarkable resilience. Yes, their cultures and traditions were deeply affected. However, it has survived and will remain vital to the American landscape. Their ongoing efforts remind us of the importance of acknowledging the full impact of our history and supporting the communities that continue to feel its effects. And with that, we wrap up today's episode. Thank you for joining us once again. We hope you enjoyed this video. Remember to hit the subscribe button for more content that delves into the untold stories of our past. And don't forget to turn on the notification bell so you will be the first to see our new updates. See you in our next video.